Welcome to the Daily Dev Talk with me, Adrian Nantchev, where we explore and share experiences, stories, and lessons 7 days a week from across the games industry, helping you make the best game you can. Stay tuned for today's episode. Good morning, Overload Nation. Adrian here. Welcome to another episode of the Daily Dev Talk, talking to game developers from across the world to bring you experiences, stories, and lessons 7 days a week. I'm joined with Jakub Kasztalski from Unborn Creations to talk about his first independent game, Post Mortem, One Must Die. Jakub, let's first talk about yourself. How did you get into the games industry?
Well, I've been one of those kids who's always grew up playing video games, and I spent a lot of my time playing with little editors. The StarCraft map editor. I probably spent more time on that than actually playing the game. So it was something I was always passionate about, and I made a few little small games when I was growing up. Uh, Over time, learning new skills. Back in college, I got my first internship at Naked Sky Entertainment, and I worked on two games for them over this span of 2 years. They were both kind of a top-down shooter, twin-stick shooters, Star Trek DAC and Microbots. Uh, so that was a really good experience that kind of gave me a bit of a grounding and understanding how a small indie studio works. Um, I was then refocusing on a few other ideas for a while, but ultimately I came back to gaming and started working on my first game, which we're talking about today, Post Mortem One Must Die, which did it's still a small and niche game, but it did better than I honestly anticipated. And it led me to founding my studio, Unbound Creations. And as they say, the rest is history. Right now, we're getting close to releasing our second game. Hopefully, the release date is going to be September. So that's kind of the long story short.
Well, yes, I used to play around with the Warcraft 3 map editor back in like 2008 or 8 and 9, and a little bit of 7, I think. This was like ages ago. And so, wow, yeah, I've used similar passions as you from before. So, tell us about Post Mortem, One Must Die, and what you wanted the player to experience.
Like I said earlier, it's a bit of a niche experimental title where I wanted to do something a bit different. Instead of having the player play the game as a game and just try to, min max their stats or get the best ending, I kind of want them to reflect on their own experience. The premise is that you are an agent of death sent to a charity gala in a conflict torn nation with the mission of taking one life at the end of the night, and whom you take and how you interact with the mortals can influence the future of the country in a number of different ways. So, what I wanted the player to really think and feel playing that is kind of making not only just that moral decision, but also asking themselves, should I even be doing that? What's my involvement here? What's fair? Should I kill this person because they may steer the whole country towards a worse path? What if I'm wrong? What gives me the right to choose? What gives me the right to decide? Maybe not talking to anyone, maybe choosing the first person within the first 5 seconds is the most fair and honest choice. And there's as some players definitely got that out of that. I got some nice emails from people about their experience. Other people just kept asking me, "What's the best scenario?" Typical trying to win the game, even though there really was no ultimate win scenario.
Yeah, first time I jumped into it, I just killed the first person I came across, and I think the scenario was generally pretty good. It was like no increased violence, but this continued. But at the same time, the conflict continued for 3 months, 3 years. So it's like, that's all right. And why did you kill me? Oh, random, no reason. Okay. Then I played it again, and then yeah, there was a lot of consequences and what ifs. And I know what you mean by saying why should I make the choice? Really testing the players' testing for imposter syndrome, like what makes me suitable to and justifiably to make these decisions. Very clever in some ways.
Thank you.
So tell me, how did you go about promoting the game?
It was kind of a long process. I do have some background in web development and marketing, which definitely came in handy. And it was a lot of social media. I would do constant updates on my blog, Twitter, Facebook, promotional photos. I basically I announced the game in January when I first reached alpha state. That's also when I started recruiting other team members. And by the August release date, it was just a constant stream of just writing about the experience and sharing it, like I said, Facebook, Twitter, IndieDB, all those different outlets. And definitely in the later stages, that started taking over my time. Definitely, I think I spent a good half of my development in the last several months just doing pure marketing, making videos, screenshots. I started getting approached by some small blogs, some more small YouTubers wanting to get an early preview. So I would send them a special press preview copy, and then maybe a slightly bigger YouTuber would see that, and then they would approach me, or I would approach them, and then a slightly bigger, and it kind of over a few months snowballed into picking up a little bit of a hype. We got featured in, for example, PC Gamer. We got a mention on Rock Paper Shotgun, which was very nice. But like I said, it was a pretty long, steady, and very dedicated effort. Definitely required a lot of time and commitment.
Yes, that's pretty cool. So content is king when it came to your marketing.
Content and constant communication. Like I said, I would be sending press releases and keeping it, trying to, like I said, content. So whenever I had something new to show or a big milestone was reached.
Exactly, and not exploiting it, so to speak, so as to get people to see it and to consume the content.
In a way, yes.
Beautiful. So, what was cut from the game and why?
There were a lot of things cut from the game. um, I think uh, I think the biggest. Let me start with the reasons. I think the biggest reason is, of course, time. Um, there were additional characters we wanted to have. There were more elaborate branches. There were a lot of other ideas that we kind of played around with. We wanted to have more rooms you could go into, more little ways you could basically snoop around where you're not supposed to, and a lot of that got scrapped because of, like I said, time. uh, I set myself a release date as a kind of a way of motivating myself. I knew the moment I announced it, I said, okay, I looked at how much I want to get done, what needs to be done, and I set myself a release date of, like I said, August, and that was it. No matter what state the game is in, by then it's gonna get out, and that really helped me a lot. But like I said, the unfortunate reason was that things did get scrapped. But I'll be happy to say that I'm kind of glad they did, because I realized a lot of the things that got cut actually wouldn't have necessarily made the game better, and a lot of the things that came out after the game was released from the criticism and even testing is stuff I wouldn't have realized if I just kept working on it. So I think it was a good balance, and a lot of those ideas that either got scrapped or I learned after the game's release are now been incorporated into my second game I'm working on.
Oh wow, so it wasn't totally scrapped and totally out the window. And I think getting that good balance is important so as to make the game fun and not too big.
Exactly. And in a big way, like I said, it was my first indie game. It was my first time managing a team. It was my first time writing my own engine and doing my own marketing. So it was a big learning experience. And as I mentioned earlier, it went farther than I anticipated. So it definitely worked out. It accomplished its goal.
And speaking of learning, what was the biggest thing you learned while working on the game?
I think probably the importance of the marketing aspect is one of the biggest. I think that if I haven't spent as much time as I have on that, the game probably wouldn't have gotten nearly as much recognition. And the second thing is just about team management and dynamics. I think those two would probably be the biggest lessons. But I also have a lot of, like I said, I already had background in developing the game, working at other studio before. So, and it was a 2D game. So technical wise, I haven't learned that much because I knew what I was going into, not necessarily because, there wasn't a lot of stuff that I had to do for it.
Hmm. And speaking of which, what was the worst thing that happened, and how did you overcome it?
The worst thing that happened, I
Yeah,
think,
maybe some.
yeah,
Go ahead, please.
yeah, I think it was one day when I got my team ready. I was, gearing up for the, like going to full production cycle. That was like right between alpha and beta. And, all my tasks were assigned. And then suddenly one day my lead artist basically just sends me an email saying that he's quitting for personal reasons. I don't want to go into details, but he had legitimate reasons. He was basically saying he needs to take several months break, and that was basically it. And I was like, I have all my schedule set. This is the release date, and I just lost my lead artist who's supposed to create everything. So that was a bit of a oh crap moment right there. And I've approached my second artist about that and asking if it would be for him possible to take over. And luckily, he had the time and the interest to do that, and you know, uh, he proved excellent and became basically the lead to the artist, Jay Flynn. And that was a bit of challenging because I didn't want to, as a leader, you have to keep the team's morale up. So I couldn't just go out being saying like, oh no, our whole schedule is messed up. So I had to, keep my face and, tell everyone that, it's all fine. We'll work it out. And even when approaching the other artists, I had to do it in such a way as not to, make it sound like, it's a big problem. Just sort of keep up the appearances in a way just to keep the team spirits up, even though internally I was like, oh crap, but in the end it worked out really well. And I think the art direction the game went with actually ended up being better. So that was kind of a bit blessing in disguise.
Yeah, I can see. I found that whenever there's failure, there's the seed for equally greater success. So in this case, you lost the lead artist, but he was replaced by someone who potentially exceeded him. Is that how you felt?
Exactly.
That's
and
amazing,
it
amazing
and it and it,
coincidence.
and it doesn't, I also don't want to paint the picture that it's always turns out like that. Sometimes you get hurdles and they will hold you back, but sometimes it works out for the better without realizing as well.
In hindsight, when you connect all the dots, yeah, then you realize.
Yep.
So, what was the best game development related purchase you made? Whether it was a software license, a top quality piece of hardware or equipment, or it could simply be a comfortable chair and a good desk.
For my first game, since I wrote my own engine and I used a variety of free libraries such as Bullet or Boost and SFML, I didn't have to spend anything on technology. Luckily, probably the best investment, honestly, was the $100 Greenlight Steam Greenlight fee because I threw the game on there without any expectations. It was kind of like, why not? We're getting good feedback from our testers; they're encouraging us, so I might as well. So I did that, and then I remember that morning when I woke up. It was several months after, and I opened up the page and it says you're in the top 100, and I was like, oh crap, we might actually get through. My game may actually make it on Steam. So that was a very nice and very motivational surprise, and that kind of, as I mentioned, that kind of led to me actually founding the studio since I didn't want to publish the game under my own name with all the potential legal liabilities. So
Hmm.
that was definitely a nice surprise that kind of led to becoming a studio that I am. And on that, I'll just throw in as an extra tip that spending the money on legal costs, such as talking to attorney, getting the right contracts, was definitely worth the money as well.
Yes, I hear that often, whether in the games industry or not, but getting legal sorted and ironed out is always worthwhile, especially in the long term. And speaking of worthwhile, What game developer related book, lecture, or learning resource can you recommend?
To be honest, a lot of the books I read were probably now are really outdated, and I don't read books anymore. Most of the stuff I learn, I just learn online via tutorials, and tend to go straight to the source these days. So when I was using SFML and Bullet, I used their documentation and samples. When I'm working with Unity, I use the Unity documentation and Google basically to find answers. So I don't think there is any book that I could frankly recommend. Like I said, if you mean just general written resources, then MSDN documentation I find great, especially if you're trying to learn DirectX. As much crap as Microsoft gets, I think they're one of the leaders when it comes to providing tools and their documentation. So that's even about general C++ or C Sharp. There's a lot of good articles and samples there.
So that is the MSDN documentation from Google, from Microsoft. That is.
Yes, the Microsoft Developer Network, or I forgot what it stands for, I think.
Like an Evernote or Trello, do you have a useful or productivity enhancing software, app, extension, or website worth sharing?
On Post Mortem, I've tried a bunch of tools. I was looking for, we were doing basically Scrum, a slightly lighter version of that, and I looked at a bunch of tools, including Trello. In the end, though, simply using Google spreadsheets worked well enough. Like I said, the team wasn't that big; it was 6 people, and the project also wasn't huge. It was still, kind of a side thing. So it worked well enough. We didn't need a big robust tools to keep us on track. And a simple spreadsheet did the job well enough. So I would say, consider your scope when you're looking at tools as well. You don't need enterprise level tools if you're not enterprise. Right now on my second game, I'm using Trello more than I did on my first game with my 3D artist, and when it's set up with the right boards, it's actually working really well and much more efficient than going through emails. And also keeping weekly Skype meetings with the team just to keep everyone on track was very good for both keeping the morale, making sure everyone is on track, and just catching up on my end as well to know what everyone is working on and make sure they're not slacking behind. So, like I said, for a small indie studio, simple tools are usually sufficient and they get the job done, much more quickly and simply.
What advice can you give to aspiring game developers, small indie studios, and people trying to get to where you are today?
I guess there are a few highlights. One of them would be get games done. Even if it's kind of a common mantra about don't make engines, make games. But like I said, the single factor that really helped me make my game was I set a release date basically over half a year before the release. And as I said, I told myself, whatever the game state is by then, I will release it, even if it has placeholder sprites I took from Final Fantasy Tactics, which it was at that time. That's what I'm gonna release it. And at the time, it was going to be a free game, and there is still a free version available. So that really motivated me, and having that date, I could basically figure out my whole schedule. I could scale the project down to whatever size was needed to release it, and really sticking to that. When I set my schedule, I had my milestones, my alpha, my beta, and I really stuck to that. No matter what happened, even if stuff had to get cut, I stuck to that, and that's what ultimately led me to release the game. And even if, like I said, stuff got cut, I think it was more worth moving forward with the game than keeping those features in. And like I said, most half of the stuff I learned, I haven't learned until after the game was released. So I think that's the biggest tip I would give is make sure just stay on track, have a release date in mind and scale around it. If you need to make the game smaller, then do it. I've spent 2 years on Post Mortem. And that too, I think, is too long. But again, it was my first indie game, so a lot of that time was spent experimenting and learning. But yeah, and definitely don't go for huge games. That was like a 2D isometric game that you can beat in 20 minutes. So definitely, consider what your resources are and scale around them.
I get you, 100%. Because if you can't scale it, then you're going to have problems further down. It might just be too big and simply not fun, and that defeats the entire purpose.
Yeah, and also please don't make another early access survival horror using Unity stock assets, please.
Okay, that's worth remembering. So, what is next for you, and what's the best way to contact you?
Next, as I mentioned, we're working on our second game called Karaski What Goes Up, and that one we were basically reaching the beta milestone right now. We've already done a first round of preliminary beta testing, so starting a slightly bigger one in the next few days. And the release date is, as I mentioned, September. So we'll see, how that goes and what the next steps are. I already have some ideas for future games. So we'll see how this goes. As far as what's after, I'm considering scaling down. Actually, I've spent about 2 years on this game as well as my first one. So I'm thinking of transitioning to maybe something a little bit smaller, something that's doable maybe within a half a year, just to kind of get a break from these really long projects. And as far as contacting me, you can check out our website for the game. I can give you the link later. It's just karaski.com.
Mm-hmm.
And do have a contact form. I'm usually on Skype too, and Twitter, Facebook as well. I can give you the links later. My screen name is usually Koobazar, Koobazaur. If anyone wants to follow me or reach out to me or get some tips, I'm very happy to chat. And there's many other devs and other gamers I've talked about, and I really enjoyed interacting with our fans or critics.
That's great to hear. But it appears that, Jakub, we are out of time for this episode of Daily Dev Talk. It was great talking to you, and lots of things to think about.
Thank you as well. It was my pleasure.
I wish you well on future endeavours and these other games you got going on.
Thank you. You too.
Stay tuned, Overload Nation. More episodes to come.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Daily Dev Talk with me, Adrian Nantchev. If you are a game developer that wants to get your name and game out there and to share your experiences and stories, or you have feedback or opinions of the show, then contact me at info@gameoverload.co.uk. That's info@gameoverload.co.uk. Stay tuned for tomorrow's episode. More to come.